Hello, everyone. Today, I want to share a story about how I got lost in a foreign country. It's a story full of surprises, funny mistakes, and a little bit of panic. But in the end, I learned something important about travel and about myself. So, sit back, relax, and let me take you to Paris. Paris, the city of lights, love, and dreams. I had wanted to visit for years. I imagined walking along the Seine River, eating warm croissants in a little cafe, and watching the Eiffel Tower sparkle at night. Now, I was finally here. The moment I stepped off the plane, I felt excited. My heart was racing with joy. The air smelled different. Everything around me felt new. People were speaking French, moving quickly through the airport. I didn't understand a word, but I loved the sound of it. I took a deep breath and smiled. This is it. My Paris adventure begins now. I pulled out my phone to check my hotel details. I had planned everything. I knew which train to take. I knew where my hotel was. Nothing could go wrong. Or so I thought. The first problem happened at the train station. I found the ticket machines, but everything was in French. There was no English option. I stared at the screen, confused. I tried pressing random buttons, hoping something would make sense, but nothing worked. People were waiting behind me. I felt their eyes on me. My face started to feel hot. Why didn't I learn some French before coming here? I thought. Then a kind woman noticed me struggling. She smiled and asked, "Anglais?" which means English? "Yes, English," I said quickly, feeling so relieved. She pressed a few buttons, and suddenly the English menu appeared. I couldn't believe it. It was that simple. I laughed and thanked her many times. Finally, I had my train ticket in hand. "Merci. Thank you so much," I said. She just smiled and waved goodbye. With my ticket, I walked toward the platform. I felt confident again. "See, everything's fine," I told myself. I just needed to take the right train to the city center. The train arrived and I got on. It was crowded, but I found a seat by the window. As the train moved, I watched the buildings pass by. I felt happy and relaxed. I imagined myself arriving at my hotel, unpacking, and then going out to explore. But after a few stops, something felt wrong. I looked at the station names. They didn't match my map. In fact, they weren't even close. My heart started beating faster. I checked my phone again. Oh no, I was going in the wrong direction. Instead of heading toward the city center, I was moving away from Paris. I felt panic rising in my chest. I was alone in a foreign country, and I didn't speak the language. What if I couldn't find my way back? What if I ended up in some faraway town? I took a deep breath. Okay, don't panic. You can fix this. At the next station, I got off the train. The platform was almost empty. I looked around, trying to find a sign or a map, but everything was in French. I had no idea where I was. I needed help. I spotted a train worker in a blue uniform. I walked up to him and tried to explain my problem. "Uh, Wrong train," I said, pointing at my map. "Paris, city center." He looked at me and said something in French. I didn't understand a single word. I just stared at him, feeling lost. He saw my confusion and smiled. Then he pointed at a different platform. He held up 2 fingers and then pointed at his watch. I understood. The right train would arrive in 2 minutes. I smiled, nodded, and thanked him. When my train arrived, I made sure to check the signs carefully. This time, I was on the right train. I sighed with relief. After what felt like forever, I finally arrived in the city. I stepped out of the train station and looked around. Paris was right in front of me. The streets were busy. People walked quickly, holding fresh baguettes and shopping bags. Cars and motorbikes zoomed by. A street musician played the violin on the corner. The air smelled of coffee and fresh pastries. I took a deep breath and smiled. Even after all the trouble, I was here. I was standing in Paris. I checked my phone for directions to my hotel. I walked down a small street lined with beautiful old buildings. The balconies had colorful flowers. The street lamps glowed softly. Everything looked like a painting. I passed a bakery with golden croissants in the window. The smell was too good to ignore. I stopped and bought one. It was warm and flaky, the best croissant I had ever tasted. As I walked, I realized something. Getting lost wasn't so bad. It had been scary at first, but it also made the moment feel more real, more exciting. I had only been in Paris for a few hours, and I already had a story to tell, and my adventure was just beginning. I woke up early the next morning, excited to start my first full day in Paris. The sun was shining, and the sky was bright blue. It was the perfect day to explore. But first, I needed coffee. I walked to a small cafe near my hotel. It looked cozy, with little round tables and chairs outside. People were sitting with their coffees and fresh croissants, chatting in French. The smell of coffee and butter filled the air. I stepped inside, ready to order. But there was a problem. I didn't know how to say my order in French. I looked at the menu on the wall. The words were all in French, and they made no sense to me. I started to panic a little. A waiter walked up to me. "Bonjour," he said with a smile. Hello?" I replied nervously. "Coffee, please." The waiter raised an eyebrow. "Café?" he asked. I nodded quickly. "Yes, café. And, croissant?" He smiled and nodded. "Un café et un croissant?" Yes, that," I said, feeling relieved. A few minutes later, he brought me a small cup of coffee and a golden croissant. I took a sip of the coffee and nearly choked. It was so strong. In my country, coffee is usually big and mild, but in France it's small and very strong. I wasn't ready for it. My eyes widened, and I coughed a little. The waiter saw me and laughed. "Americano?" he asked, pointing to another type of coffee on the menu. I nodded, still coughing. He took my cup and brought me a bigger, lighter coffee. "Merci," I said, feeling a little embarrassed. He just smiled. "No problem. Enjoy Paris." After breakfast, I decided to visit the Louvre Museum. I had always dreamed of seeing the Mona Lisa. The streets were busy. People walked fast, speaking French all around me. I followed the map on my phone, trying to find my way. But then I got lost. I stopped a man on the street and asked, "Excuse me, do you speak English?" He shook his head. "Non, désolé." "No, sorry." I pointed at my phone and showed him the name Louvre Museum. He looked at it, then started speaking very fast in French. He pointed in different directions, moving his hands a lot. I had no idea what he was saying. I just stood there, nodding and smiling. Oui? I said, pretending to understand. He smiled and walked away. But I was still confused. Did he say go left, or right, or take a bus? I sighed. I needed a better way to ask for directions. I took out my phone and opened Google Translate. I typed, "Where is the Louvre Museum?" and translated it into French. Then I tried again. I stopped an old lady and showed her the French translation. She read it, smiled, and pointed down the street. "Tout droit," she said. Then she held up her hands and showed me 1, 2, 3 fingers. I understood. Go straight for 3 blocks. "Merci," I said happily, and walked in the direction she showed me. Google Translate had saved me. That evening, I went to a restaurant for dinner. The menu was in French, and I wanted to try something new. I saw a dish called steak tartare. It had the word steak, so I thought it was beef. I imagined a delicious grilled steak with potatoes, so I ordered it. When the waiter brought my plate, I looked at it in shock. It was raw meat. Steak tartare is a French dish made of raw beef with spices and an egg on top. There was no grill, no potatoes, just cold red meat on a plate. I didn't know what to do. Should I eat it? Should I send it back? I didn't want to be rude. The waiter saw my confused face and smiled. "First time?" he asked in English. I nodded slowly. "I thought it was cooked." He laughed. "Many tourists make this mistake, but don't worry, it's very good." I hesitated, then took a small bite. The texture was strange, but the flavor was actually nice. It was soft, spicy, and rich. Not what I expected, but not bad either. I smiled at the waiter. Not what I thought, but good. He laughed again. "Bienvenue en France." Welcome to France. The language barrier was hard, but I realized something important. People don't always need words to understand each other. That night, as I walked back to my hotel, I saw an old man playing the accordion on the street. A little girl was dancing next to him, spinning in circles. Her parents clapped and laughed. I didn't understand their words, but I understood their happiness. Even in a foreign country, surrounded by a language I didn't know, I didn't feel alone. Sometimes a smile, a kind gesture, or even a shared laugh over a strong cup of coffee was enough. I planned my 3rd day in Paris carefully. I had a list of places to visit. First, I would go to Montmartre, the artistic neighborhood. Then, I would take a boat ride on the Seine River. In the evening, I wanted to see the Eiffel Tower light up. Everything was set, or so I thought. But sometimes travel does not go as planned, and that day I learned that getting lost can lead to the best adventures. I left my hotel in the morning feeling excited. The air was fresh, and the city was slowly waking up. People were walking fast to work. Cafes were already full of people drinking coffee. I checked my phone and found the bus I needed. I walked to the bus stop and waited. When the bus arrived, I got on without checking the number carefully. That was my first mistake. The bus moved through the city, and I enjoyed the view. But after a few stops, I noticed something strange. The buildings looked different. There were no tourists. The streets were quieter. I checked my phone. My heart dropped. I had taken the wrong bus. I pressed the stop button quickly and got off at the next stop. I looked around. I had no idea where I was. I was lost. Again. But instead of feeling scared, I took a deep breath. Maybe this was a chance for a new adventure. I walked down a narrow street, looking for a way back to the main road. Suddenly, I smelled something delicious. Fresh bread, cheese, and spices. I followed the smell and found myself in a local market. It was beautiful. There were colorful fruits, fresh flowers, and small food stalls selling French pastries and warm crepes. The market was full of locals, chatting and laughing. It was not a tourist place. It was a hidden gem. My stomach growled. I hadn't eaten breakfast yet. I walked up to a small stall where an old woman was selling pain au chocolat, a French pastry with chocolate inside. I smiled and pointed at one. "One, please," I said. She smiled back and spoke in French. I didn't understand, but she handed me the pastry and some change. I took a bite. It was warm, buttery, and full of chocolate. "Good?" she asked in a thick French accent. I smiled. "Delicious." She laughed and nodded. "Welcome to Paris." We didn't speak the same language, but at that moment I felt connected to the city in a special way. After eating, I needed to find my way back. I checked my phone, but the battery was low. I saw a man sitting near the market with a small fruit stand. He looked friendly, so I walked up to him. "Excuse me, how can I get to Montmartre?" I asked. He smiled but shook his head. He didn't understand English. I pointed at my phone, where I had a picture of Montmartre. He nodded in understanding. Then he pointed at an old bicycle near him. I was confused. Did he mean I should ride a bike? He laughed and shook his head. Then he called over a younger man, his son. The young man spoke some English. "My father says there is no bus stop here," he explained, "but he can take you on his bike." I hesitated. A ride from a stranger? But they both looked kind, and I had no other option. So I agreed. The old man smiled and patted the seat on the back of his bicycle. "Come, come," he said. I climbed onto the small seat, holding on to the sides carefully, and just like that, we were off. He pedaled through the streets, past small bakeries, flower shops, and cafes. The wind blew through my hair, and I felt like I was in an old movie. People on the street looked at us and smiled. I laughed. It was not what I had planned, but it was an adventure I would never forget. After a few minutes, we reached Montmartre. The old man stopped his bike, pointed up the hill, and smiled. Montmartre, he said. I got off and thanked him. His son translated. He says, "Welcome to the real Paris." I smiled and shook his hand. Merci. As I walked up the hill, I realized something. Travel is not just about places, it's about people. I had planned my day carefully, but getting lost led me to a market, a new friend, and a special ride through Paris. Sometimes the best moments are the ones we don't expect. Getting lost in a foreign country is not easy. At first, it is scary. You don't know where you are. You don't know who to ask for help. You don't speak the language. It feels like the world is too big and you're too small. But then something changes. You take a deep breath. You stop panicking. You look around and you realize this is part of the adventure. That day in Paris, when I took the wrong bus and ended up in a part of the city I didn't know, I felt all these emotions: fear, confusion, frustration. But in the end, I learned something important. Getting lost is not always bad. Sometimes it is a gift. After the old man dropped me off in Montmartre, I felt happy. It had been a great adventure. But soon I had another problem. I had spent too much time in the wrong part of the city. Now it was getting late. My phone battery was almost dead, and I was far from my hotel. I didn't know which bus to take. The metro map looked complicated. My feet were tired from walking all day, and suddenly that familiar feeling came back. Uncertainty. For a moment I felt completely alone. The streets were full of people, but I knew no one. The sun was setting, and the city was turning golden. It was beautiful, but I couldn't enjoy it. My mind was too busy worrying. What if I couldn't find my way back? I sat down on a bench and closed my eyes for a moment. I told myself to breathe. Instead of focusing on my fear, I started thinking differently. What was the worst that could happen? I was in Paris, not in the middle of a desert. There were people around. I had some cash. I could ask for help. And then a thought came to me. Maybe I don't have to rush back. Maybe I can enjoy this moment. So I opened my eyes and looked around. The street lights were turning on. Musicians were playing in the distance. Couples were walking hand in hand. Cafes were glowing with warm light. For the first time, I saw the magic of the city at night. I smiled to myself. I had been so worried about being lost that I almost missed this beautiful moment. Still, I needed to find my way back. I walked to a cafe and decided to ask for help. A young woman was sitting at a table drinking coffee. She looked friendly, so I took a chance. "Excuse me," I said. "Do you speak English?" She smiled. "Yes, a little." I showed her the address of my hotel. "Do you know how I can get here?" She looked at my phone, then nodded. "Yes, you need to take Metro Line 4. The station is close." I thanked her, and she gave me one last piece of advice. "Don't worry," she said. "Getting lost is just another way to explore." Those words stayed with me. That night, as I finally reached my hotel, I felt something new. I was not afraid of being lost anymore. I had learned that uncertainty is part of travel and part of life. I had learned to slow down, to enjoy the moment, and to trust that things would work out. And most importantly, I had learned that sometimes getting lost leads you exactly where you need to be. After a long day of surprises, confusion, and unexpected adventures, I finally stepped into the metro station. The young woman at the cafe had given me clear directions. Metro Line 4 would take me closer to my hotel. I looked at the signs carefully. I checked the metro map again and again, making sure I was on the right path. I didn't want to get lost one more time. When the train arrived, I stepped inside and found a seat. The doors closed and the metro moved forward. For the first time that day, I felt a deep sense of relief. I was on my way back. As I sat on the metro, I thought about everything that had happened. In the morning, I had a perfect plan. I knew where I wanted to go, what I wanted to see, and how I wanted my day to be. But the city had other plans for me. I had taken the wrong bus, found a hidden market, shared a moment with a kind old woman, and even ridden on the back of a stranger's bicycle. I had felt lost, scared, unsure, but also excited, amazed, and alive. I had started the day as a tourist, but after everything, I felt like a traveler. When I finally reached my hotel, I stood outside for a moment. The night was quiet, and the streets were calm. The city, which had felt so big and overwhelming in the morning, now felt warm and familiar. I realized something important. Travel is not just about seeing famous places. It's about the moments you don't plan. It's about getting lost, meeting strangers, making mistakes, and finding beauty in the unexpected. If I had followed my original plan, I would have had a good day. But because I got lost, I had an unforgettable day. The next morning, I packed my bag and prepared to leave Paris. But as I walked through the city one last time, I felt different. I was not afraid of the unknown anymore. I had learned to trust the journey, and I knew that whether in travel or in life, sometimes the best moments happen when you stop trying to control everything and just let the adventure unfold. The end, or just the beginning. As I stepped onto my train, leaving Paris behind, I smiled. I had come to this city as a traveler, but in many ways I was leaving as a different person. And I knew this was not the last time I would get lost, because now I wasn't afraid of it anymore. I was ready for the next adventure.